Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I know you can't speak, it's fine. Just give us a moment. We are having everybody enter in from the waiting room and we will get started momentarily. You okay, Emma?
Yes, juggling lots of different things at the same time. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this session today. Sarah Brooks, my co-host, and I would like to welcome you to this afternoon session on the topic of beyond business as usual. And we know that this is an unusual time across the region, and many of you are balancing numerous different competing priorities right now, whether that's, are we working from home? Are we sending the staff back in? Are you homeschooling your children? You're having all of those different conflicting things all happening at the same time. And so we felt it was important that we create a space for this particular conversation today. Um, Often, most of you are in situations like this, finding yourself holding two very important responsibilities. One, which is looking after the people within your organization, whilst also two, making sure that there's business continuity and operations are effective. So we might find that that's quite a challenging time to balance those many things. And this discussion today is going to bring together three perspectives that are essential for this moment. We have my co-host, Sarah Brooks, who will be looking at the conversation through a HR lens, myself through a cultural intelligence lens, and then Bobby Hartshorn, who will be looking at this from a well-being lens. So just to give you some information about each of us so that you know who you're listening to, some of you may be familiar with the three of us, but just not to make any assumptions. So Sarah Brooks is a fellow certified CIPD HR professional, founder and managing director of FICRA HR. She is a UAE consultant specializing in strategic talent management, organizational development, and positive workplace culture. With nearly 3 decades of HR and business experience across the UK and also here in the GCC for the last, I don't know how many years. She supports SMEs with innovative HR solutions that drive employee engagement and organisation effectiveness and compliance. She's recognised among the top 101 global HR minds at the World HR Congress. And Sarah's expertise spans the full employee life cycle, including recruitment, onboarding, policy development, and performance management. And she's also the co-host of the HR and CQ Show podcast, where she often discusses HR trends in the UAE. Sarah has also been featured on Dubai Eye Business Breakfast radio show, discussing hot topics regarding employer health and safety obligations and remote work challenges. And so she comes to you today from her home office in Dubai. And then for myself, I'm the founder and CEO of Infinite Consulting. We're a training consultancy that specializes in cultural training and coaching. I'm a thought leader in cultural intelligence, dedicated to understanding and improving cross-cultural interactions in global and diverse environments. I'm a CQ fellow, part of an elite group of global experts specializing in the application of cultural intelligence. And I've been a TEDx speaker, keynote speaker at major events like GITEX, HRSE and the L&D Summit, and featuring numerous Middle East business publications such as Gulf Business Leaders, Middle East Consultant, and such like. And along with Sarah, I've also appeared on Dubai Eye radio station. Again, I co-host the HR and CQ podcast with Sarah, and I have a book out called Dubai Decoded, looking at cultural intelligence strategies for thriving in Dubai. And then our guest today is Bobby Hartshorn. She's the founder of Wellwise and a specialist in workforce risk and organisation and performance. Her work focuses on helping leaders understand how workplace conditions, leadership behaviour and organisation system influence resilience, retention and execute capability. And through their Wellwise people risk diagnostics, she helps organizations move beyond engaging sentiment to identifying the underlying drivers of workforce strain, performance drag and attrition risk, translating complex people data into decision grade insight for leadership teams. So welcome to our session. And I suppose the first question that I want to perhaps pose to Sarah and Bobby is, how would you each say or describe the current mood or sentiment among HR and business leaders in the UAE right now?
I think from what I'm seeing, generally speaking, business leaders are business as usual. From the outset, I mean, sort of from the outside looking in, I'm sure from a personal perspective, they have a very different feeling. I know some of the personal connections that I have expressed that they are concerned about the situation and a little bit anxious and what have you. HR leaders feeling the same way, putting on a brave face as we do. We are the voice of reason and information in such situations. And as somebody quite rightly said, there's no training in the world that could ever prepare you for something like this. So, you know, there are a number of us that are extremely fortunate that this is the first time that we're ever having to experience this. Others from different areas have experienced it previously and have some understanding and awareness. But again, for this region, it's the first time in 20, 30 years nearly that there's been any kind of activity of this level happening that involves GCC states. So there's a lot of disquiet, a lot of anxiousness, a lot of sleepless nights and stress and worry. And, you know, put the name into what it is, people are scared, understandably so, but feeling safe at the same time, which is a weird combination. Bobby, what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm not based in the UAE at the moment, so I'm kind of looking on it as an outsider from Portugal, and it's been a really interesting and unsettling watch from this side of the pond. I think what I've observed is kind of two major sort of responses. One is a very decisive, very well thought through consultative approach. So I've seen people commenting that they're consulting with clients on, you know, what can we let go at the moment. I've heard people consulting with employees, local leaders, not just, you know, CEOs making calls, and being quite specific about, you know, where are our offices located in each country and what risk does that pose, and a very sort of strategic and organization specific response, which has been reassuring to see. On the flip side, I've seen a lot of rabbit in headlights, which is totally understandable. As you said, nobody is trained for this. There is no right way of doing it. There's no perfect way of doing it. And so we're seeing a lot of, what's the news telling us to do? What are you doing? How are you handling this situation? Have you had any of these? And sort of a mild sort of uncertainty and panic creeping in. And I think that that's probably, you know, that's not in any way a criticism of those actions. Those actions are understandable. But I think what that probably shows up is that there is a more entrenched issue here, which is how confident a HR and how much space a HR are given to advise when the wheels come off and when we face these challenges, and how much psychological safety is present in the organization. And I know that's a topic we're going to get into later. So yeah, it's been an interesting observation, but I have to say, I think in general, everybody seems to be very sensible and focused and rational about the whole thing, which is good to see.
What I would say is that it's nothing like is being reported in the UK press. It is very, very the opposite to that. Um, Emma, if I can pull you into that element of the conversation, because I think some of what Bobby is talking about also impacts the responses, have a cultural aspect and element to it, as well as the requirement for information, documentation to support decisions, this type of thing that we're seeing a lot of in some of the group chats that we're in.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we remember that the UAE is such a multicultural workforce. And that means then that the way that we communicate looks differently across different cultures, meaning each individual person within your organization is going to receive information in a different way. Some of us are indirect communicators and some of us are more direct communicators. But research shows that when we are dealing with a multitude of different cultures, that it's important that the preferred method is a direct communicative style and an approach that's taken, because it means that the information is very clear and explicit, and there can be no confusion about what is being explained or what is being expected. So it's really important when we're thinking about our group-wide comms piece that we might be sending out in these sort of times, that we're very explicit in the message that we're giving to make sure that there's no mixed messages or misunderstanding on any part.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with that. And it's something that I think the last time we had to deal with anything like this was in COVID. So we have some flashbacks, maybe a little bit of PTSD from COVID and that situation. There is I'm noticing the same reluctance for the work from home strategy, remote working, recognizing the safety and security of their employees, team members, and what have you. And also questions coming up around employees who are wanting to repatriate, Emma, as you mentioned, I think if we work it out, it's like 98% or something almost of the UAE population is an expatriate, so not necessarily local. Now, there are a large number of us that call the UAE home and might not want to be going back to our own countries, but there are those that say, no, I feel safer. How can we, maybe Bobby, you can come in on this, how can we help HR navigate that, where somebody said, I'm going to repatriate, I've been in touch with my embassy and they've got a ticket for me in a work environment and they might be the only person? How can we navigate that?
Yeah, look, I was talking on the groups this morning about the fact that we have to be very careful not to take on some sort of parental role here. We are HR in an organization. We are not the governors of every human that works for us. And people do have different concerns. They have different responses, as we've just said, from a cultural and from a personal perspective. They have different pressures, maybe coming from home. You don't know what's happening in their home country in terms of their needs there. I think we have to, at this point, given that we can all hope that this is going to de-escalate, but we have absolutely no idea what is going to happen, how long this is going to go on for, and to what level of severity. We can only take everything on a day-by-day basis. We can't start writing long-term policies about this, because just as we discovered in COVID, what you decide on Tuesday is changed by Thursday. So, we have to be more reactive, and we have to be more flexible than maybe we're naturally comfortable with. So I think dealing with those cases on a case-by-case basis, ultimately you are never going to stop somebody leaving against their will if that decision has been made. If they are a person who is critical to your business, then facilitating their ability to continue contributing from wherever they may end up for whatever period of time that looks like. Being cautious of kind of threats and any kind of negative, language around that. And I suppose that, at this point, because we don't know the length of this or the severity of this, we would hope that these would be temporary measures that we can just adjust for in real time, and that coming back in a few weeks or months' time, that person rejoins the business feeling very appreciative of the support and flexibility that you were able to offer them in that moment. If we try and take a very hard stance, it could backfire on us later. You know, trust and those types of factors will unfortunately last a lot longer than this crisis. So yeah, I think at this point, given uncertainty, it's going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis, and also encouraging your staff to be open and frank with you about what their plans are, so that you don't suddenly find 30% of your population has just left the country without knowing about it. So you have to create that psychological safe space for them to come with you to you and say, this is what I'm going to be doing and this is my choice. And you just have to be able to support them with that, but also be honest. You know, it may well be the case that down the line you cannot continue to employ somebody from overseas 6-12 months out from now. So, you know, transparency, clarity, all of those things, fairness, honesty, they are what are going to de-escalate this situation.
Okay, fantastic.
And so, Sarah, in terms of your thoughts on this, what would you argue would be effective HR leadership? What does it look like in a time of uncertainty, particularly here in this UAE context?
For me, I would be having consultations with my leadership team regularly to make sure that whatever activities that we've got going on in place are sustainable at the time. As Bobby said, things change very rapidly. So as we've had this week, we've had announcements about remote working, we've had being encouraged, we've had announcements that it's actually safe, we've had announcements that you know, schools are all remote learning at the moment as well. So we need to look at all of those elements and accommodate the changes as they happen. We need to be mindful that every single person in the environment and the organization is an individual and has different reactions, as we've said, culturally, personally, psychologically, and that we can't tarnish everyone with the same brush. We need to think, as you've said, long term, in so much that what we do now, we will reap the rewards of in the future, so to speak. So taking care of people, making sure that people have access and the right information. So providing them with the contact details for their embassies, allowing them the chance to register with their embassies so they get the updates, giving them what are the formal legal channels for communication from the government so that they're getting the right updates. But then when the messaging comes from your organization, it reflects that overall government message as well. So there's no disparity. You know, the government says this, but you're saying that. Builds that trust, psychological safety again. And also working to empower individuals to do their work. So working from home, facilitating that, setting things up, looking at those, you know, if you've got to maintain operations, because you know, my background is hospitality, and I'm super conscious that their hotels are not closed. They are all full. And I cannot imagine, I've seen lots of commendations for frontline staff in hotels, and the retail staff and various others as well, for how they're handling people that are coming in. We need to think about that, because they're being, to a certain degree, a relief and a release for those customers and those guests, of being, you know, voicing their concerns. Well, that's an individual taking it on, and they've got their own. So making sure they have EAP solutions, having helplines that they can reach out to, not having that information, having space to decompress. Maybe you need to relook at structures around work, so people are on rotational shifts a little bit more. They have maybe 3 days off instead of 2, shorter shifts, something like this, so that they can decompress, that they can process their own emotions and their own situation and get time to just balance that off. Otherwise, everybody is going to be overwhelmed very quickly. The difference between this and COVID is that a lot of hotels were empty. People were able to leave the country. You know, airspace was closed and then reopened, and you know, people were able to leave the country. It wasn't peak season quite so much. It was a downturn, so there was less people here, and it gave, you know, I was in hotels at the time, but it gave us chance for people to be on, you know, have more time off. So there was a balance there, and it was less anxiety around it. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that we need to be thinking about is that the cultural backgrounds of our employees will also determine the way that they process information as well, and how they're responding to what's happening. or how they're expressing themselves. So, you know, when there are these announcements from your organisation saying this is the procedures that we're going to take, we need to be mindful of the fact that not everybody feels comfortable displaying emotions outwardly. And another thing is about 70% of the population here come from more authority orientated cultures, which means that there may be no argument and there may be silence when certain decisions are being taken, or you might also believe that your employees are coping well under the circumstances. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that is actually what's happening. It might look like that on the surface, on the outside, but internally there may be a lot more going on. People will also have different priorities towards family across different cultures as well. And so, you know, when we're asking people to come in to work, they may not necessarily feel that same level of comfort to be parted from their family. They may also then still also have a level of responsibility to their family. You know, remembering at the moment that that children are still being schooled remotely and work, you know, from home. And as much as the government has recommended that the private sector is also to work from home as well where possible, I have already been hearing about people that are going back into the workplace, and I'm not necessarily talking about you know, hospitality or emergency services. I'm talking about just general general
I've
people.
heard the same.
And so people have got this conflict now of my child's at home, you know, maybe they don't have any home help, and yet I'm being called to come back into work. I've got no childcare solution. You know, what am I supposed to be doing in this situation? And then have this fear of speaking up and saying, this is my situation and my circumstances. I don't have any childcare, but you're demanding for me to come to work. I can't do that. And so there, you know, there's a lot of mental load that is being put on employees because they don't feel the freedom to speak up because they come from these more authority orientated cultures, and yet they're in this predicament maybe where they need, you know, to stay at home because of their children.
Yeah,
I was just going to chip in on that. I think it's such a great point, and actually there's two sides to this. There's the side you're talking about, which is we have already, and I have to say I am quite surprised and frankly a little bit disappointed that we've already seen mandated returns to offices. I think I have to say I think it's woefully how to describe.
We all feel the same way, don't worry. And I think
unaware. It's risky. I mean, I sort of say this semi in jest, but I was talking to a Jordanian colleague of mine the other day, a good friend who lives over in Dubai, and she was telling me that, you know, sitting on your roof in Jordan with a shisha and a cup of tea, watching missiles come down, has become a neighborhood afternoon attraction. It's a very, very different way of looking at how this plays out, depending on your culture, and it's very easy to sit in the top seat in an organization and say, because I think this, because I feel this, because this isn't worrying me, that means that everybody else in my organization has to think like that as well. And I think it's a very, very dangerous place to, A, put your organization, but B, put your individuals as your employees. So there's that point to, you know, pick up with Emma with regard to, you know, those insensitivities and the practicalities of just managing this, let alone the emotional side and the psychological side of managing it. But then there's the other side. You know, I was in Dubai for a very long time as a single person and not having somebody at home and not having children. And there are a huge number who fit that category as well. And maybe they have children, but they don't live in country with them. So there's a lot of people here for whom their work community is their family in Dubai or in the UAE or in Saudi. And so we have to be cognizant that if we can open offices and if people don't want to feel so isolated, that's a choice as well, right? So it works both ways. And I think that's that whole piece about we don't want extremes on either side of this. Extremes in anything like this is always a bad idea. You don't want mandated returns, and you don't want you can only do this. You know, if you can try and find a happy medium, then people can kind of flex and bend within that. It will never come back to you negatively in your business. You know, people are not going to take advantage. They recognize that there's they can have their job and they can do their good work and within the boundaries of that. You know, you don't have to control for that. What you have to control for is the long-term and the immediate trust building, the motivation, the engagement, and how people feel. And you know, that's ultimately will be rewarded back to you if you get it not 100% right. No one's going to get it 100% right, but if you get it sort of 80% right, then you're doing really well there.
Yeah. I think one of the things sorry, Emma, I was going to just chip in with that on the mandated return to work side of things. And I am fully cognizant that there are individuals in business that are from, as Emma just mentioned, from a very authoritarian, I can't even say the word, authority-driven hierarchical matrix and culture. And they need a definitive, you know, something like the motto saying, "Oh, we encourage remote working," doesn't give them the enough information to make a decision, right? And whilst they could, they need to rationalize it. Well, the government told me to do it, so that's why I'm doing it. The government's not telling me, and they're just encouraging me. Well, I'm encouraged to drive safely on Sheikh Zayed Road, but it doesn't mean I do it. Okay. So it's a very difficult situation to be. The one thing I would come from a little bit more of a legal aspect, and if people need that to be able to convince their team and their leaders to make a decision around this, in the absence of an official instruction, is that you have a duty of care to your employees. Under the administrative executive regulations, I think it's article number 19. I can't remember exactly the number, which is not like me at all. But this is about health and safety of your employees in the workforce, and occupational health and safety. And it also touches on labour accommodation, but ignore that bit for this. And it talks about the employer's responsibilities and the employer's obligations to make sure that the workspace is safe. It talks about, in the instance of adverse weather conditions, that you have a more of a legal, and I would suggest that we could call this adverse weather conditions as well, to a certain degree, that we need to be mindful. You know, even traveling to and from work is a risk, and just being aware of it, and not saying that everybody needs to be somewhere or nobody, you know, like you say, no, neither of the two extremes, but just having a framework that people can work to, wherein your team are safe. You need to check out your medical insurance policies. You need to check out your workmen's compensation policies, your third-party liability policies. Where do they stand in terms of claims if somebody unfortunately got injured on the way to work because you didn't have a framework that allowed them to work from home, or you didn't put additional precautions in, or whatever? That's a big risk to take. And I'm saying injury, it could be worse than injury. Touch wood, I sincerely hope that's not the case. I don't want anybody to be injured either, but you know, this is the sort of realities of the situations. I'm mindful of the people that we are trying to convince, and the mindset somewhere of the people we're trying to convince, that type of structured formal documentation of saying, hey, look, boss, and even if we don't make it safe, and we don't give that capacity, the law also allows that you still have to pay the employee under the premise of being, you know, enabling the employee to do their work. If you don't allow them to do their work, then you still have to pay them. So it's in your interest to take care of them and to do this properly. Sorry, Emma.
It's fine. I was going to ask you the question of what can HR do at the moment to support line managers who are perhaps under pressure to deliver results, but they're also wanting to support their teams from an emotional perspective, to make sure that they're getting the right support?
I think it comes back to what we've kind of said already with regards to having tools available and knowing what tools are available, making time for that. Making time that not every meeting that you have is just about work. Have a bit of a downtime, right? It's not that, you know, first thing on Monday morning we just talk about the numbers and we've got to achieve this and da, da. It's actually saying, no, let's stop, let's take a breath, let's pause, and see how everybody's doing. And then you'll have a meeting later in the day or the next day to talk about numbers and things. I do believe that leaders also ought to be reassessing targets at this point in time as well. And I think it's grossly unfair if they don't reassess targets and hold people accountable to a target that was set in normal conditions, because that puts undue stress, pressure and anxiety on people outside of, and especially let's think about the individuals who are working in real estate, for example, or other commission only roles where they don't have a basic salary, where their sole income is coming from selling properties to people who are potentially not able to come into the country or do viewings, or paperwork might be slowed down, it might be disrupted, and platforms might be disrupted because of activities that have gone on. So we need to think about that. If you've still got that target hanging over you and you're physically unable to do it because of things outside of your control, that's not fair. So those things need to be looked at. But having that downtime, having, for want of a better phrase, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who was an interview candidate I was dealing with, and I did about 10 interviews yesterday over the telephone. And every single person, I took 5 minutes, 10 minutes out of that interview to have a chat with them about the situation, about how they're doing, how they feel. One of them, we had a laugh and we had tears rolling down our face. We were laughing so much about situations and things, but it was appreciated by her and by me to be able to have that release, so to speak, and to have that open conversation with someone that maybe, somebody who's not working and who is sitting at home with family, who needs to be in a stressful situation and has that anxiety as well. So remember the human in all of it.
Absolutely.
The other sort of word of warning that I would give on this is just to not try and be a therapist.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's potentially a risk here that we overreach in terms of, again, that sort of parental role that we might, have felt in a leadership or management position historically, or in an HR position. It is highly risky for you as an individual and for the person that you're supporting to overreach beyond your professional capacity. And yes, there's being human, and yes, there's asking, kind questions and helping people to get through. But when that starts to trip into trying to diagnose and assess and offer psychological advice, and maybe you should see a doctor and all this, you're in a very, very grey land there. So I think my advice is, if someone is unsettled but feels like they're able to work, and actually a lot of people want to because it's a great distraction from the outside world, we can talk to them, we can acknowledge the situation, we can be honest about the fact this is all a little bit scary and different, and help them to kind of recognize that you are a human as well as their leader or manager. And then it can go back into the work thing. It can go back into, well, how we're clarifying our priorities. What can we drop that it just doesn't matter at the moment? What do I really want you to focus on that we really have to deliver? Can we reduce that unnecessarily workload? Can we play around with targets, as you've said, Sarah? Increasing check-ins, definitely, and keeping those expectations clear. And then the great question is, well, what can I do to help you stay focused and to deliver on these roles? How can I facilitate that? And that might be, well, I only want to work 6 hours a day because I need to help my son or daughter. Okay, fine. If you're getting a solid 6 hours a day out of people during this, you're doing pretty well, I would say. So being flexible is good. And then knowing when you're starting to see these challenges are emerging into a place where this is not a person that can cope with work at the moment, and this is a person that is experiencing profound stress and dysfunction. And then I think it might be something along the lines of, do we need to adjust your workload at this point? Do I need, would you like me to introduce you to our support services? Should we be having a conversation with HR, whomever is the appropriate person in the organisation, and being and sort of coaching a little bit your leaders and managers into where does that line begin and end? Because I think there is a risk here that we're suddenly expecting people to step into territory that they are not qualified for.
Yeah, one of the things something that I put myself through as training and education last year that I found very useful, and I think would be extremely useful to HR leaders and others in this particular situation is being a mental health first aider. So it's not about being able to, as you say, diagnose, but be able to open a conversation, or having the skills and the tools to open a conversation, to recognize somebody's behavioral patterns, speech patterns, what have you, and then direct them to help. And it's a really important skill that is, it does need to be developed. It does need to, it's not something we're born with. And it's something it's not overly expensive in terms of an actual qualification, but it supports individuals and it gives people the right tools to be able to have that conversation without feeling that they're taking on board the woes of this person and what have you, but also being able to direct them to the right individuals. So if anybody is interested in that training, I have contacts of people that can provide it for you. We can share that afterwards, or pop your details in the chat box and we can pick that up. Just coming to Emma, one of the important questions that I would like to ask is, what cultural leadership behaviours create stability during uncertainty? So what would your top tips be for leaders in how they can behave in this situation?
I think that we can look at the leaders of the country as a great example of what that looks like, because I feel, and I don't know about anybody else, but I think they've done a great a job in making everybody that's living here feel calm and at peace in the fact that they have this situation under control. And yes, there are things going on, but they have communicated information in such a way that has made me personally feel quite secure and safe living here at the moment. So I think as leaders within an organisation, if we were taking that as an example, our job is to make sure that we're using calm, clear communicative styles, calm tone, making sure that the decisions that we're making are visible. So we're being transparent in kind of the different decision making that we're taking and why we've taken the decisions that we've taken. So people are not just seeing kind of maybe the end response, but how have we come to that conclusion? How did we get there? And also just showing, as we've kind of discussed through this conversation, a level of fairness and flexibility. Each employee's situation or circumstances looks different from the next, and we can't treat each person with the same response. We have to offer what I would call situational leadership, where we say, what's the situation, what's the context, and how then am I going to respond in an appropriate way so that I am showing this employee that I am supporting them well. And because at the end of the day, once this is all over, we want the employee to talk about the brand and the organization in a really positive light. We want them to say that during all of that, my company and my organization showed real care and concern for their employees, and that is why I want to continue working for them. We don't want a situation when this is all over where you have a mass exodus because all your employees were treated in such a poor way that none of them want to work for the organization anymore, and they go and work for an organization where their friends said, oh, my company did XYZ and it was great and they really looked after us. So I think it's really important that just to be more succinct in what I've just said there: clear tone, clear communication, visible decision making, and make sure that we're showing fairness and flexibility where it's required.
Yeah, I think you make a great example, sorry, Bobby, of the leadership here. I think it's an absolute masterclass in leadership, demonstrable leadership, transparency, developing trust with people. The fact that the leaders of the country went out for coffee and shopping at Dubai Mall the other night, and it's without a large presence of security or overly heavy-handed or anything at all, meeting and greeting people. Just absolute masterclass. I think a lot of other leaders around the world could take lessons from them for sure.
It's I would say good leadership is easy in normal times. Great leadership is what shows up in a crisis, and this is really the defining moment of, and without wanting to keep the topic on the current situation, but very aware that it hasn't sort of avoided my attention or my sort of perspective, that I do feel like there's a timeliness with this in terms of how the workplace has evolved since COVID, how things have changed, how values and expectations amongst employees have changed, how channels for, you know, displaying your appreciation or your lack of have grown, and that's really placing considerable pressure on leaders and what leadership looks like moving forward as we go into the future of work. And this is almost about as good a test as it gets for starting to think in that more future of work kind of way. And how are these values, and, you know, are values just something we have on a piece of paper and on a strategic deck, or do they hold firm when the wheels come off, when the unexpected comes, when crisis arrives? And that really is the piece, the stability piece that holds organizations together for the long term. And getting that piece right now, as Emma said, is going to be the difference of what happens in a few months down the road, when hopefully this is all behind us and we're back to normal. But yeah, it's definitely a moment to step into your great leadership and not just your default leadership.
Absolutely, and to kind of challenge yourself a little bit as well, I think. So oftentimes, you know, we're so used to dealing, and there's a big difference between what I would classify as a day-to-day workplace crisis and this kind of crisis, and where actually, okay, my default response to this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, okay, hang on a minute, is that correct? Is that going to be the right answer, the right decision? Do I have the right information? Do I need to communicate it differently? Do I need to, you know, like come from a different angle? And I think, as you say, we need to be, you know, it is from good to great. It's a hard lesson and it's a tough one in the circumstances, but it'll be great moving forwards. Once we come out the other side, everybody in this country is going to be an amazing leader, I hope. We'll get a certificate at the end.
Yeah. Just thinking of one other thing that sort of, I picked it up more when you were talking about the sort of hospitality piece, and how at the moment the hotels are all full, and that's obviously a very different dynamic to the peak of COVID. There is a reality that there are going to be certain roles in our organisations that are placed upon at a higher demand level as a result of this situation than others. And when we're talking about fairness and about working from home, you know, how can we think about structurally, how can we take the weight off, say, HR? I mean, HR are going to be overwhelmed with having to put out masses of communications, having to manage these one-off situations with repatriations. You know, there's suddenly going to be a lot of extra administrative work and a lot of extra communications work that's going to fall to that team. Well, that team didn't suddenly grow overnight because of the situation. So have you got people who are maybe sat in a quieter area of your business? Maybe operations is quiet at the moment because of obvious reasons, and could you take some administrative support and some leadership support and some management support out of those areas and place them where you've got denser workloads, so that you know, so that one area of your business doesn't come out of this completely burnt out and exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed and drained, whilst another one has had a nice time sitting at home watching Netflix and playing with their kids. So, you know, it's not just about saying, you know, how do I build trust? How do I manage each situation? It's about structurally considering what is actually at play in my business right now. Where do we have pressure points? How can we join together and create team and a sense of, you know, belonging and team responsibility and cohesion and trust? And, you know, and how does that need to look in terms of getting through the stuff that really does have to be got through and can't be put to one side?
Absolutely. So I think, you know, we've covered an awful lot, and I'm conscious that we've got 15 minutes towards the end. I've seen, Bobby, that you've answered a couple of questions that's in the chat. If anybody else has got questions that they can put in the chat as well, what I would do is just to sort of say the question that came up, is that in multicultural environments like the UAE, stress and uncertainty often show up differently across cultures. What signals should leaders look for to recognize when teams are struggling, especially when people may not openly express it? Emma, can you give us some insights on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just important that we don't just, ask how you're doing and then when everyone says, yeah, we're fine, that we take that as the as the complete answer, and that we actually just take that time just to explore that a little bit further and maybe ask again, how are you really doing? Just to see if people are willing to open up. And provide some more information or insight into how they're feeling and how they're coping at the moment. But you'll also find, as much as sometimes it's kind of frowned upon that we might have clusters of different nationalities within our organisations, it naturally happens because it creates psychologically safe spaces for people within the organisation. But then in this moment, use that to your advantage. There will be key people within different clusters within your organisation that you maybe can talk to and say, how are people doing? What's the general sense of the people that you normally hang out with and go for lunch with, as an example, and see if you're getting an undertone of information from different demographics of people within your organisation, and be thinking about how you can then support them. And then in terms of what would the solution be, I suppose that's over to Bobby to say, what are some of the solutions that we can maybe be making sure that we're offering at this time?
Yeah, I think the other thing is also slightly indirect questions are quite helpful at this stage. So sometimes people aren't going to answer the question like you say, "Are you okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. Frankly, we do that in normal life on normal days. So it's going to be no different here. I think sort of some indirect questions around, is there anything I can do to support you at the moment? Are there any tools that you need? So you're almost asking a question that's going to let them reveal their facial expressions, let them reveal the tone of their voice. Does it come out a little bit more panicky? Do they look a little bit sort of harangued when you ask them that? Do they look relieved? These are all like the clues that you're going to get that aren't verbal. You might find that people are just disappearing, so they've stopped joining the Teams calls or the Zooms calls. You might find that their work has become very slow, or they're making lots of mistakes, or their written word is quite jumbled, compared to usual. So yeah, there are some signs that somebody's mind isn't quite where they're fully focused on things. In terms of what we can do about it, I mean, again, it will depend largely what you've got in-house already. And this is, again, as Sarah alluded to before, psychological support services, EAPs. I know in Abu Dhabi, they've launched a 24-hour mental health service through Abu Dhabi Health. So people to be directed there. But yeah, and also, but again, some people aren't happy to engage with those solutions, right? Culturally, they are taboo topics. So that might be when we have to create a more flexible work environment, give them 2 or 3 days, decompress, send them some tips and things. There's some great stuff around breath work and vagus nerve stuff. It's very easy to find on the internet to help with calming that you can just distribute through your internal channels that are, quick 5-minute exercises people can do in their own homes, in their private and comfort of their own homes. But yeah, I think just being cognizant that your verbal communication is not going to be where you're going to get the cues for this stuff much of the time.
I think also it's key at the moment to also be reminded as well that this is still the holy month, and where we may have extra pressures on people because of the circumstances and situations, it is still a time where people want to have that freedom to be with their family, and to have that time of rest that they need, to have that time to have iftar with their family, and so there may be some companies that are putting pressure on people to be available at times of the day that ordinarily that they wouldn't be because of the situation. But I think one of the things we just need to keep in mind is, yes, there are those organisation pressures, but it is the holy month and we need to make sure that we're giving our employee, we're honouring that time, and we're culturally aware of that, and we're sensitive to that situation, and we're making sure that we're honouring that for people as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. Obviously, I mean, iftars are being sort of corporate iftars where people are going out and celebrating, people are not gathering so much, which is noted. But people are still fasting, they're still having to attend to that part of their life, and be aware of that, because also, whilst fasting is and the holy month is an important part of life for Muslims, it does put, in usual normal times, undue stress and strain on individuals in terms of mental capacity and things. We're obviously coming into the second, third week of it now, so we're into a routine and people are a little bit more adjusted. But if you layer on top of that the current situation and the stresses, strains, anxiety of that, and being mindful that with the cultural and nationality demographic that we have in the country, we also have a lot of Iranians who are here. We have a lot of Israelis who are present in the country, and people who are differently affected, and Americans who are differently affected by the current situation. And layer onto that, your nationality, your religion, the requirements and everything else. It can just be extra. So we need to be mindful of that with everyone that we're dealing with. Be empathetic as far as possible, sympathetic, compassionate, retain the human aspect without being a psychologist, as Bobby has said. And Bobby, any closing thoughts? We've got sort of 4 or 5 minutes left just before I wrap up.
Yeah, I think I was just having a quick look through my notes. I think creating psychological safety is probably going to be the most powerful thing. And if it's been missing in your organisation or in your team for whatever reason, now is a great platform upon which to sort of try and condition that a little bit better. A psychologically safe environment is one that says, I can say, I'm not clear on this, I am struggling, I need some help, I've made a mistake, without the fear of rebuttal, without the fear of being chastised, without the fear of any kind of, punishment or something in return. So as a manager or a leader, HR advising your managers and leaders within the organization, you need some key phrases that should be being repeated and repeated and repeated by management on the internet through messaging, which is, we acknowledge that this situation is different, that it is unsettling, that it is affecting people in different ways. If something feels unclear, unmanageable, overwhelming, you see a risk that you don't think we've picked up, please raise it early and then provide the channels for which that can be done. I think just having that reassurance that they hear that you get it, without drama, without talking about geopolitics and who's to blame and all of that stuff, just within this very confined context, we get it. It's unusual. We're all in it together. We're here to listen. We're here to help, and to make that explicitly clear multiple times. It takes 4 to 6 times to hear the repeated message before it soaks in. So you do have to keep saying it over and over again. And that, I think, if you can create that safety, the chances of people speaking up without creating another crisis that has been buried, for you to now deal with as HR, is going to be much better and will also help with that trust building and that commitment piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the proof is in the pudding. So it's all very well saying you're okay, you can speak up and giving that confidence and that repeated message. But when somebody does, your actions speak louder than those words. So don't then beat them up for doing it, if you see what I'm...
Absolutely.
Because that's oftentimes where people fall foul of such communications, is they say, yeah, no, tell us. And then they come and it bites you in the ass, so to speak. Because the response and the reaction is not what it should be. Okay, well, look, we're drawing to a close now, and I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's attended. We had, I think, as we got there, it was about 55, 56 people that attended, so that's a fantastic number. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I've learnt things as well from both Emma and Bobby. I always learn things when I talk to Emma about cultural intelligence and what have you. So thank you very much. Emma and I have another event, which is we're still going ahead with the planning because we're using the power of positivity. That this is all going to be water under the bridge by the time we get there, and we'll have a different topic. So we have our summit that is open for the registration, and that's happening on the 14th of April. Thank you very much for your time. We obviously will have a recording of this, and we will figure out how we're going to share that with everyone. And have a great rest of the day. Take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup, as somebody once told me. So make sure your mental health is in place before anybody else's and having to deal with anyone else's. Emma and I have also set up an HR and CQ community WhatsApp group. It's not lots of spam. It's not sort of, you know, whatever. It is literally just a conversation that you can have. So please click on the QR code and join that. And we look forward to seeing you and speaking with you soon. Thank you once again, Bobby, for joining us from Portugal. Thank you, Emma, and we'll see you both soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Oops.